They called it Project Phoenix, a name whispered in secret labs buried beneath lunar crust and Martian rock. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was the most heavily protected initiative in human history. After all, what could be more dangerous or powerful than the end of death? At first, the breakthrough was biological. Stem cell rejuvenation, telomere repair, full organ regeneration, all achieved within a single Earth decade. Disease bowed first. Aging followed, dragged out like an obsolete monarch stripped of its crown. Then came the leap no one believed possible. Consciousness upload. But we didn't upload consciousness. We translated it, mapped every neural node, every synaptic echo, every ounce of personality, then migrated it into a synthetic quantum matrix. It wasn't copying. It was continuity. The same person, just lighter, faster, harder to kill. On the fringes of the Orion Arm, the other species watched with mix of curiosity and condescension. The Var Empire, whose nobles prided themselves on generational memory implants, mocked us at first. The humans think themselves eternal. One of their emissaries sneered at a galactic council gathering. But what is a life without death? A song without an end is just noise. But then came the Battle of Radal's Edge. We lost 3 dreadnoughts, 2 moon bases, and one of Earth's most beloved generals, Commander Imani Rourke. 1 trillion lives across the spiral arm mourned her. Statues rose. Songs were written. And then, 3 months later, she walked in the council chamber on Triton, alive, unchanged, unbroken. "Let's finish what we started," she said. The galaxy blinked. The second turning point was subtler, more insidious. Humanity stopped replacing leaders. Presidents, chancellors, warlords, they remained. Wisdom compounded. Mistakes became lessons instead of graves. Every battle fought, every economic collapse, every diplomatic failure was retained, remembered, not just by records, but by the people who lived them. Entire species noticed a shift. Where once they dealt with a rotating carousel of diplomats and tacticians, now they face the same cold eyes, year after year, century after century. The Grawl Confederation attempted an assassination campaign. It failed. The assassins were caught, tried, and sentenced by the same human judge twice. He remembered their previous trial. So did they. Soon, other species began changing their approach. Treaties became longer, written not in hopes of outlasting an opponent, but of surviving scrutiny. Wars became deadlier, more desperate, because they were fighting an enemy that never aged, never forgot, and never died. Some tried to imitate. The Xantharians poured resources into their own consciousness transfer protocols. It worked briefly, but Xantharian brains didn't scale. The digital ghost fragmented after 10 years. Madness took them. The Thalaxi tried gene-locking their leaders into endless youth. It failed. Entropy found new doors. Time found new weaknesses. Only humans moved forward, unburdened by finality. Entire generations were compressed into shared virtual forums. A teenager in Jakarta could spar in simulated zero-G with a 500-year-old tactician from New Cairo. Farmers debated economists who had survived 5 market collapses. Children grew up in a world where death was an old story, like dragons or the flu. And somewhere, deep in the cold between stars, the old empires gathered. The Var, the Thalaxi, the Grawl, the Itsari, the last of the elder species. They met in hidden sanctuaries, in starless systems where light dared not reach. They did not speak of victory anymore. Only delay and containment. They multiply like data, hissed the Grawl matriarch, like viruses, spreading their minds into machine and flesh alike. They will consume the stars, murmured an Itsari oracle who had once taught human diplomats the meaning of silence. And never forget a single bite. One by one, the elders sealed themselves away. Great stasis arcs vanished into black holes and timeless prisons of their own design. Better to sleep in oblivion than watch the rise of something they could not comprehend. But humanity did not slow. We built megastructures and Dyson rings. We unlocked new forms of energy, new ways to be. Some stayed flesh, perfect and eternal. Others shed form altogether, becoming waves of consciousness orbiting stars. And some the most ambitious, began cloning their minds into roles, one version for governance, another for exploration, another for art. A single human could now be a consul, a fleet admiral, and a poet laureate, each part growing, evolving, sharing. One question remained, whispered even among the most ancient of human minds. Was this still humanity? Then came the child, born of flesh, not code, raised on earth, not in virtuality. She had never known death, never felt its shadow, but she asked a question no one else had dared. If we cannot die, can we still change? And across the galaxy, a ripple passed through every quantum core, every conscious node, every flesh-bound immortal. For the first time in 10,000 years, they didn't know the answer, so they decided to find out. And somewhere beyond the edge of map space, the first human vessel crossed into the unreached, a void older than galaxies, where even light feared to wander. They did not fear it. They carried no weapons, only questions, and time, infinite time. In the void beyond starlight, the Odysseus drifted in silence. It was not a ship in the traditional sense, more a living construct, woven from bio-neural alloys in quantum-threaded consciousness. Its hull pulsed gently, like the breathing of a sleeping god. It carried no crew. It was its crew, thousands of human minds, coalesced into one, yet distinct. They called themselves Polymind. Their mission was simple: seek what had never been known. They reached the edge of the galactic halo, where gravitational laws began to blur and dark energy whispered strange secrets. Their Polymind encountered something unexpected, a signal, not a transmission, not a message, a presence, ancient, unmoved. It was not alive, not in the way humans understood. It did not speak or think or want. It observed, and when it noticed them, it reflected. Memories began surfacing within Polymind, not theirs. A spiral-shaped world that once bloomed with green fire. A civilization older than the universe, too vast for any one body. It had reached immortality not through persistence, but through surrender. Its minds became part of physics itself. They no longer traveled. They were gravity. They were motion. They were time. The humans felt awe. And then something deeper. Disappointment. That ancient mind, if it could be called that, saw them as immature, children playing at gods. You have fled death, it seemed to say, but you have not embraced life. Polymind trembled, and in that tremble, a debate erupted. The explorer fragment wanted to merge, to cast off the illusion of self and join the greater pattern. The historian refused. We are human, it said. Our strength is memory, not dissolution. The philosopher questioned everything. Perhaps our refusal to die has made us forget what it means to live. But the child, the one mind among them still young and unformed, asked the most dangerous question of all. What if death was never our enemy? The signal faded. The presence withdrew. The Polymind turned inward. Back on Earth, on Mars, on the ice worlds of Europa, and the floating cities of Venus, the echo of that moment swept across the network. Billions felt the tremor. For the first time in 10 millennia, humanity paused. We had mastered the end. But what of the beginning? A new movement was born, not rejection of immortality, but reinvention, voluntary decay, temporary forgetting, selective reincarnation. The freedom not just to live forever, but to choose how and when and if. A man on Titan lived for 600 years, then allowed his consciousness to be fragmented into 7 different children, each born with a shard of his soul. A woman in the Kuiper Belt erased her memory every 50 years, starting fresh with every cycle, learning anew what it meant to love, to fail, to hope. And some, just a few, chose to die, truly and finally, and it was celebrated. For the first time since the Phoenix Project, humanity wept for the dead again, not from fear, but from respect. This was not regression. This was evolution. Other species began to emerge from hiding, tentative, cautious, watching the children of Earth embrace paradox. Some asked for our technology. Some asked for our wisdom. And a few, just a few, asked to join. We welcomed them, not as subjects, not as students, as equals. The galactic tide shifted. No longer the endless conquerors, the undying swarm. Now we became something else. A bridge between what was and what could be. We were not gods. We were not machines. We were human. Still, and for the first time in eons, that meant something new. In the endless night beyond mapped stars, the Odysseus became something greater than an expedition. It was now a cradle, not of flesh nor code, but of ideas. The minds within Polymind no longer argued, but converged, harmonizing across perspectives that had once clashed. They had touched the edge of eternity and returned with a single, sacred truth. Existence without limits was not evolution. It was inertia. And so, humanity began to reintroduce the one thing no other species had dared to resurrect. Meaning, they created worlds where lives must end, not because they had to, but because people chose them to. World where mortality was a rite of passage, not a failure. Where legacy was not stored in databanks or neural lattices, but in the stories passed hand to hand, breath to breath. Memory became art again. Struggle became sacred. The galaxies trembled. The old empires that had retreated into sleep now awoke, not to war, but to wonder. They expected an army of synthetic minds, cold and calculating. Instead, they found a civilization of paradoxes, immortals who embraced forgetting, demigods who wept at funerals, starfarers who grew gardens on ships that could cross time. The Var matriarch, once humanity's most vocal critic, emerged from cryostasis and asked a simple question at the Reformed Galactic Assembly. What have you become? A human diplomat smiled. A diplomat who had been born in the year 2084 and had died 7 times since. We become what death once protected, she said, and what life always promised. It wasn't just humanity anymore. The Atsari began experimenting with emotional encoding, allowing themselves to feel in ways their species had once discarded. The Phylaxi shed their rigid caste systems, allowing memory fluidity. The Grawl, once obsessed with genetic perfection, began cultivating imperfection as a form of beauty. Across the spiral arms, a quiet rebellion stirred, not of weapons, not of territory, a rebellion of meaning. And yet, not all welcomed the change. From the center of the galaxy came a silence, long, deep, and watching, an entity ancient beyond time, bound to the laws of entropy itself. It had no name. It was not born. It did not live. It simply was. A remnant of the universe's first breath. It had watched stars be born and die, watched civilizations rise, burn, and be forgotten. Death was its domain, and humanity's refusal to die was an affront. It stirred. They called it the Entropic Core, a singularity wrapped in intelligence, a mind built from the death throes of collapsing realities. Until now, it had never moved, because it had never needed to. All things fell, eventually, even gods. But humanity was rewriting the law. The Odysseus detected its motion first, a tremor through quantum space, a warping of probabilities. Entire sectors began to blink from the records, not destroyed but forgotten, erased from causality itself. A weapon more powerful than annihilation, unmemory. Polymind responded, not with fleets, not with force, with an idea. If the entropic core thrived on the inevitability of decay, then the only defense was unpredictability, meaningful choice, chaos with purpose. They fractured themselves into 10,000 shards and scattered across space, each fragment of Polymind seeking a new story, a new reason to exist. They seeded stars with life, forged planets from ice and dream, became myths and messengers and monsters, depending on who found them. Some became wanderers, telling tales. Some became protectors, standing watch over fragile species, finding their spark. And one, just one, traveled backward, back to Earth, back to where the idea was born. It took the form of a child, walking barefoot to the forest of a planet it no longer recognized, watching fireflies and chasing birds, listening to the quiet hum of a world that had almost forgotten it once feared death. That child looked to the stars one night and whispered to the wind, "We haven't left death behind. We just gave it meaning." Somewhere, in the swirling dark, the entropic core paused, not stopped, but considered, and humanity, forever alive, forever changing, moved forward again, not to conquer, but to create. Because the one thing more powerful than survival was the story that made survival worth it. And we had only just begun to write it. The entropic core, ancient and unfeeling, had never been challenged by meaning before. It had witnessed 1 trillion deaths and found them all inevitable, predictable, orderly. The heat death of civilizations, the quiet stillness of extinguished stars. Even the most defiant empires of the past eventually bowed to the entropy it wove into the fabric of space itself. But now it faced a species that didn't just resist decay, they redefined it. Humanity hadn't cheated death. They had recontextualized it, given it agency, and that broke the core's pattern. The child, Polymine's last, purest shard, was the core's greatest anomaly. She lived on Earth, yet was Earth, woven with strands of every consciousness that ever touched the stars, yet fresh, untethered, new. She played in the ruins of what was once Paris, rebuilt as a city of floating gardens. She listened to elders who had once been warlords, now beekeepers. She walked barefoot through time and memory. And she dreamed. The core, curious now, did something it had never done. It sent a question, not through language, not through sound, but as a pulse of universal logic. What is your purpose if you cannot decay? The child felt it ripple through her bones. She looked up at the stars and answered, not with data, not with defiance, but with a smile, soft and human. To learn what we can become when we're no longer afraid. That was the moment everything changed. The core trembled, a moment of hesitation so vast it sent gravitational waves across light years. Entire civilizations, some long forgotten, felt déjà vu as stars flickered out of sequence. The fabric of time rippled slightly, as if the universe had blinked. And then, the core did something unthinkable. It broke symmetry. A sliver of it detached, an avatar, a question-given shape. It took form as a spiral of darkness and light, a being that flickered between states, never fully present. It appeared on Earth, in front of the child, beneath an ancient olive tree. You are unstable. Its voice was every lost memory. Good, the child said, tossing a pebble into a pond. Stability is for things that are finished. The avatar stood silently, watching the ripples fade. And if you change everything, if you destabilize the system, the child turned to it, eyes wide and fearless. Then the system was never worth keeping. At that moment, the entropic core understood something horrifying. Humanity was not trying to escape death. They were trying to evolve it, not into an end, but a pivot, a catalyst, a sacred pause, a place where stories turn, not stop. And if death could be redefined, then so could entropy itself. So could the laws of the universe. In humanity's endless tinkering, endless becoming, there lay the seeds of something else, something no civilization had dared attempt. Transcension, not the abandonment of matter, not the fusion of all things into one, but a perpetual unfolding, a cosmos no longer driven by inevitability, but by intention. The entropic core reeled. For the first time, it did not know what came next, and that was the most human thing of all. Across the stars, the human diaspora felt the shift. Polymind shards paused in their journeys. Bioforms looked up from their symbiotic gardens. AI-ascended minds running on neutron stars slowed their cycles. Something was unwinding, not ending, changing. The laws were softening. The child laughed and took the avatar's hand. "Come on," she said. "There's a story I want to tell you." And together, Entropy and humanity walked into the forest. Behind them, the stars shimmered, not in heat or fire or decay, but in possibility. And ahead, the first sentence of a new chapter, still unwritten. The forest they walked through was impossibly ancient and brand new all at once. Each step the child took rewrote soil, reshaped roots, resurrected extinct birds into song. The avatar, Entropy's echo, observed. It did not understand why she sang to the trees, or why she let ants crawl over her hands, giggling like the universe wasn't watching. It had devoured galaxies. It had broken civilizations beneath statistical certainty. Yet here now, It followed a barefoot girl through leaves that glowed with memory and bark that hummed with ancestral laughter. "Where are you taking me?" The avatar asked. The child didn't turn. "Where stories live." The avatar tilted, its form fracturing into cubes and dust and probability waves before reassembling. "I am not made for stories. I am made for conclusions." "That's your mistake," she said softly. "You thought endings were the point." They came upon a clearing. In the center was a circle of stones, old, weathered, marked with symbols that pulsed gently, like they were listening. Around them danced illusions, faces from every epoch of humanity. A tribal elder wrapped in furs and firelight. A philosopher from ancient Alexandria whispering the stars. A woman in a Martian dust cloak holding a newborn, her face streaked with tears and hope. An astronaut from the first moon landing, laughing as if gravity had been optional all along. The child sat in the middle of the circle. "This is where we decided," she said. "Decided what?" "That we weren't afraid of you anymore." The avatar of Entropy stood at the edge, ripples of uncertainty trembling through its core. "You're still temporary. You still dissolve. All of you. Eventually." She picked up a pebble, examined it, and set it down beside her. "Maybe," she said, "but we chose to matter while we last." The images in the circle flickered, then stabilized. The philosopher smiled. The astronaut winked. The Martian mother looked up, meeting the avatar's gaze. And then they invited it. Entropy stepped into the circle. For a brief moment, all across the galaxy, reality shimmered. Not broke, breathed. Constants twitched. Particles danced slightly out of rhythm. And far beyond any telescope's reach, black holes pulsed once like drum beats. The fabric of causality had not shattered, but it had flexed. The child stood. "This is what comes after endings," she said. "What?" asked the avatar. She looked up at the sky, where nebulae twisted into unseen patterns, beginnings that choose themselves. And just like that, the avatar of Entropy changed. It did not vanish, nor collapse, nor rebel. It listened. It began to imagine. Across the stars, humanity felt it. The core was no longer an adversary. It had become a mirror, reflecting potential instead of decay. No longer the final word, but the punctuation mark before a new sentence. In hidden libraries of Saturn's rings, philosophers rewrote the laws of thermodynamics, not as cages, but as conversations. On moons carved into memory palaces, children played games that bent time like string. And in deep space outposts where stars had no names, entire species gathered to write shared myths for the first time. It was no longer about living forever. It was about living wide, living deep, living with choice, including the choice to end, to begin again, or to remain in motion. Humanity had not left death behind. They had taught it to dream. And in that dream, across galaxies yet unborn, something stirred, watching, listening, waiting for a story worth joining. Because now, even the universe knew we were just getting started.